In the fall of 2023, in a quiet suburb outside Denver, Colorado, a man named David Harper thought his life was already written in stone. At 55 years old, David was a former college football player known for his strength and discipline on the field. In those days, he believed only in what he could see, measure, and prove. Faith, miracles, or anything beyond science felt like fairy tales for other people, not for him. But 2 decades earlier, in 2001, David's life had been struck by a blow he never recovered from: the sudden death of his only son. Ethan. Ethan was just 8 years old, a bright-eyed boy who loved fishing trips and Saturday morning pancakes. On the day Ethan fell ill, David was away at an important game. When his wife, Linda, called saying Ethan had a fever, David dismissed it as something minor. "I'll be home after the game," he said, not realizing that would be the last chance to hold his son alive. By the time he returned, Ethan was gone. That moment shattered David's spirit. The guilt was crushing, and no victory or trophy could fill the hollow in his heart. He walked away from sports, distanced himself from friends, and even with Linda under the same roof, their marriage drifted into a quiet, unspoken sorrow. Days became months, and months became years. David stopped dreaming about the future. Every morning felt the same, another long day without purpose. Then, on a chilly morning in November 2023, David decided to fix a loose shingle on the roof of his 2-story home. It seemed like nothing important, just a quick chore before lunch. But in one misstep, his foot slipped, and he fell nearly 18 feet to the frozen ground below. In an instant, everything went black. There was no sound, no wind, no pain, only an endless, still darkness. From that darkness, a faint glow began to appear. It wasn't harsh or blinding, it was soft, like the light of a sunrise breaking through morning fog. As he moved toward it, David felt every weight of guilt, every fear, every regret melt away. Then he saw something that stopped his breath: Ethan. Not the weak, sick boy he had lost, but radiant, healthy, and full of life. Ethan's eyes shone with a warmth that pierced David's soul. "Don't be sad anymore, Dad," he said softly. "I'm happy here. I'm at peace." In that moment, David realized that love never dies, not even in death. But before he could speak more, Ethan told him, "Someone is waiting for you." And that's when David saw him, Jesus Christ, standing in a light more powerful than the sun yet gentle enough to embrace. Jesus looked at David and called him by name. He told David there were 4 great events that would happen soon, events the world needed to know about. What happened next would change David's mission in life forever. David stood frozen in the presence of Jesus, unable to move, unable to speak. The light surrounding him was alive, warm yet powerful, like it could pierce through every hidden corner of David's soul. Jesus took a step closer and said, "David, the world is about to face 4 great events. You must remember them, for your mission is to share what you have seen." The first event, Jesus called the Great Deception. He described it as a wave of false light that would cover the earth. People would believe they were following truth, but in reality, they would be walking into darkness. Charismatic leaders, advanced technologies, and even miracles would lure people away from God. "Not everything that shines is from me," Jesus warned. "Test every spirit. Look beyond appearances." The second event was the Great Awakening. Jesus explained that many hearts would turn toward God during this time, like seeds suddenly sprouting after a long drought. But with the awakening would come persecution. Faith will grow, but so will opposition. He said, "Those who stand firm will inspire others, but the cost will be high." The third event was the time of purification. In this season, families would be divided, some choosing God's way, others rejecting it. David saw flashes of people arguing at dinner tables, siblings turning away from each other, and friends breaking apart over matters of faith. Yet in the same vision, he also saw tearful reunions, forgiveness, and love bridging impossible gaps. "This time will refine hearts," Jesus said, separating what is true from what is false. The fourth and final event was my return. Jesus' voice grew both solemn and full of hope. "I will come again, not in silence, but in glory." The faithful will rejoice, and every tear will be wiped away. But for those who rejected me, there will be judgment. David felt his heart pounding. The visions were vivid. Cities bathed in strange light, crowds cheering false saviors, underground gatherings of believers, and the sky splitting open with a brilliance unlike anything on earth. When the visions faded, Jesus looked at David with deep compassion. "You will return, David," he said. "Tell them, warn them, and remind them of my love, for I am giving the world a little more time." The next moment, David felt a sudden pull, as if the ground beneath him was rising. The light faded, replaced by the cold November air. He gasped for breath, blinking up at the gray sky. His body ached, but his spirit felt unshakable. He knew his life was no longer his own. As David lay on the cold ground, the November wind brushing against his face, he realized his life had just been rewritten. His chest ached, his hands trembled, yet a strange warmth pulsed inside him. The visions of the 4 events still burned vividly in his mind, each one etched deeper than the last. The sound of sirens grew louder. Paramedics rushed toward him, their boots pounding against the frozen dirt. "Sir, can you hear me?" one of them shouted. David nodded faintly. He could hear their voices, but his thoughts were somewhere else, still in that brilliant light. At the hospital, doctors examined him, running tests and shaking their heads in disbelief. "You fell more than 15 feet, and your heart stopped for several minutes," one physician said. "It's a miracle you're alive." David almost smiled, because he knew exactly why he was still breathing. It wasn't luck, it wasn't chance, it was grace. In the days that followed, David couldn't rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same images, the false light sweeping over cities, believers gathering in hidden rooms, families torn apart yet finding healing, and the sky splitting open in glory. These weren't just visions, they were instructions. One evening, while sitting on his porch in Cedar Hills, looking out at the bare trees swaying in the wind, David made his decision. He would not waste the time he had been given. "If you send me back, Lord," he whispered, "then I will speak." David started small. He shared his story at the local church, his voice trembling at first, but gaining strength as he spoke. Some listened with tears in their eyes, others looked skeptical. But David remembered what Jesus had told him: not everyone would believe, but everyone deserved the warning. Weeks turned into months, and David began traveling to nearby towns. He spoke at community centers, veterans' halls, and even small coffee shops where only a handful of people would show up. He would talk about the great deception and give examples, how truth can be twisted, how people can be drawn to what feels good instead of what is right. He spoke about the Great Awakening and the cost of standing firm in faith. He shared stories of families he'd met who had reconciled after years of bitterness, reflecting the time of purification. And every time, he would end with the promise of the Lord's return, urging his listeners to be ready. Some laughed, some walked away, but others stayed, their hearts stirred by something deeper than his words. David didn't measure success by numbers. His mission wasn't to convince everyone, it was to be faithful. And deep inside, he knew the clock was ticking. David knew that people connected more deeply when they heard real stories, not just prophecies. So, in every town he visited, he began sharing examples, moments that mirrored the visions he had seen. One winter evening in a small church outside Cedar Hills, he told the story of a man named Jack, a successful businessman who had built his fortune on half-truths. Jack presented himself as a man of integrity, donating to charities and speaking at community events. But behind closed doors, he manipulated contracts, exploited workers, and used his influence to silence the truth. That, David said, is the false light. It looks warm and trustworthy, but it leads people away from what is real. Heads nodded in the audience. They understood. Then, David shared a story about a woman named Sarah. She had once been far from faith, living for herself and chasing recognition. But one night, during a blackout in her city, she found herself praying with strangers by candlelight. That night, she felt a presence stronger than fear. She started attending Bible study groups, and soon, Her living room became a meeting place for dozens of believers. That, David explained, is the Great Awakening, not just crowds, but hearts turning back to God. Even in the dark, he spoke of the time of purification, telling the story of two brothers, Tom and Michael, who hadn't spoken in over 20 years. Their bitterness began over a small inheritance dispute, but it grew into a wall neither dared to cross. When Michael was diagnosed with cancer, Tom finally visited. Through tears, they prayed together, forgiving each other completely. Michael passed away months later, but in peace. That, David said softly, is purification, not comfortable, but holy. And finally, David shared a vision like memory of the Lord's return. He described it not as a distant legend, but as something he could almost see, the sky splitting open, a light brighter than the sun yet gentle enough to draw every eye, and a voice calling the faithful home. The room was silent, even the children stopped fidgeting. Afterward, an elderly woman approached him. "Son," she said, "I've lived 82 years, and I've never heard it put like that. I believe you were sent for a reason." David smiled. It wasn't about him. It never was. It was about preparing hearts for what was coming, whether tomorrow or decades away. And as he walked out into the cold night, the wind biting his cheeks, he whispered, "I'm still on mission." As winter in Cedar Hills stretched into the early days of spring, David began to notice something remarkable. The more he shared, the more people approached him privately, not to debate, but to confess. They weren't confessing to him as a priest, but as someone who had seen and felt what they feared was coming. One evening, after a gathering in a modest community hall, a middle-aged man named Robert stopped David at the door. His voice trembled. "I've been living in that false light you talked about," Robert admitted. "I've built my whole life on appearances, on making sure people think I'm a good man. But I've ignored my faith for years. I've ignored my own family. If the things you've spoken about come to pass, I'm not ready." David placed a hand on his shoulder. "Robert, readiness doesn't come from pretending to be perfect. It comes from turning around, now, and walking back toward the truth. You can't change yesterday, but you can start today." Robert's eyes filled with tears. And that night, he went home to speak with his estranged son for the first time in 5 years. In another town, a young woman named Emily approached David after hearing his message. She had been raised in church but drifted away in college, chasing career dreams in the city. "I didn't think God cared about someone like me anymore," she said quietly. David told her about Sarah's story, about how God's call can break through even in darkness. That night, Emily decided to return to her small hometown and help her aging parents run a community soup kitchen. David realized these moments weren't just coincidences. They were proof that the awakening had already begun, in small but powerful ways. Yet he also knew the other side of the prophecy. Not everyone would turn back. Some would hear the warning and laugh it off. Some would keep chasing the false light until it consumed them. One evening, sitting alone in his small rented cabin on the edge of town, David wrote in his journal, "Every soul has a choice: to turn toward the light, or to keep running into the shadows. I can't force anyone. I can only keep telling the truth." The next day, he spoke to a crowd in the town square. His voice carried over the chatter of a busy Saturday morning. "You may think you have more time. You may think this warning is for someone else. But I promise you, there will come a day when the sky will break open, and the truth will be undeniable. On that day, it won't matter how much money you have, how much influence you hold, or how many people think well of you. It will only matter if you're ready to meet him." Some in the crowd turned away. Others stood still, staring at him as if the weight of his words had frozen them in place. David didn't shout, and he didn't beg. He simply let the silence settle after his final sentence. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than a sermon. The days in Cedar Hills began to grow warmer, and the smell of blooming dogwoods drifted through the air. David could feel that the season of change wasn't just in the weather. It was in the hearts of the people he met. Yet, even with these moments of hope, he knew his work was far from over. One afternoon, he walked along Main Street, stopping at the corner cafe where he often met with townsfolk. Inside, The air was thick with the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls. As he sipped from a warm mug, a young man approached him. "Mr. David, I'm not sure I believe everything you say," the young man began, "but it makes me think. I've been spending my nights playing games, wasting time. But yesterday, I called my mom just to tell her I love her. I don't know why I did it, but it felt right." David smiled gently. "That's where it starts, one small step. God doesn't ask you to leap across the canyon. He asks you to take the first step toward Him." Word of David's journey began to spread beyond Cedar Hills. Invitations came from neighboring towns, and soon he was speaking in school gyms, church basements, and even under the open sky in farmers' fields. His message wasn't polished like a politician's speech, it was raw, simple, and personal, and that was why people listened. But David also understood that time was precious. The prophecy he had seen in that moment between life and death wasn't meant to stay locked in his own mind. It was a warning, a call to action, and a promise all at once. Some would accept it, others would walk away, but no one could say they hadn't heard. One evening, he stood by the lake outside town. The water shimmered in the sunset, and a gentle breeze stirred the trees. He thought of Robert reconciling with his son, Emily serving in the soup kitchen, and the young man who called his mom. These were seeds, and seeds, given time, grow into something far greater than themselves. David took a deep breath and whispered, "Lord, as long as I have breath, I will keep planting." The story reminds us that no matter our age, past mistakes, or missed opportunities, it is never too late to start again. Each person has a unique mission placed in their heart by God. Some carry visible signs, others live it quietly, but all are equally important. The key is not how grand the mission appears, but whether we live it with love, mercy, and faith. Small acts, calling a loved one, helping a stranger, forgiving someone, can become seeds of hope that grow into something far greater. Life's purpose is not measured by achievements alone, but by the lives we touch and the love we share. My friend, if you're still breathing, your mission on this earth isn't over yet. Maybe life has broken your heart. Maybe you've lost people you love. Maybe you carry regrets that feel too heavy to bear. But hear me. God is not finished with you. You still have stories to tell, hands to hold, and hearts to lift. Don't keep your light hidden. The world needs your wisdom, your kindness, and your faith. Share it, speak it, live it, because when you do, you might just change someone's eternity. If this message touched you, pass it on. Share it with a friend, a neighbor, a family member, because you never know whose life might be saved by hearing it. And remember, every day you wake up is another chance to walk in love, to walk in faith, and to walk with God.